Hey everyone, good morning. We are at Brisbane for people who are joining in person. We've got directions outside and happy to help if anybody has issues figuring out the space. Please give a shout on chat and we can help you find where we are located. Thanks everyone for joining in. Today's topic is a very interesting topic and an important one from an observability perspective. Uh, the topic of conversation is proactive monitoring for a robust platform by Rishi. Rishi has had years of experience on observability, primarily having worked on App Dynamics and VMware's observability platform. He has spent a huge amount of his career on implementing observability across multiple organizations. Um, the last conversation was very interesting. We had lots of participation. Thanks for everybody who joined in, and also looking forward to more presenters joining in from other organizations and also presenting other interesting topics. With this, I'll hand it over to Rishi. Rishi, you can take it away from here.
Thanks, Pradeep. Hi, everyone. Good to see participants joining in. So today's topic, as Pradeep said, is about observability and how to make the platforms we use robust. So starting off, typically the personas that are involved in observability or in general monitoring across any organization are the following. So there is an SRE team. There is, of course, the customer. Customers are important for our businesses because that's where all the revenue comes in. Then, of course, we have the app owners, we have the developers, we have COOs, and we have the CFOs, which are interested in what's going on in the organization. So today I'm going to tell you a short story about amazinggroceries.com. It's a customer-facing business, customer-heavy. It's a kind of a retail business with e-commerce side to it. And let's see what problems they faced and how they solved it, right? So I'm going to tell you a short story about amazinggroceries.com. Now, Caroline was an amazing groceries customer, and she used to buy groceries online. But one day, when she was buying groceries because there was a lockdown in the city because of COVID and the pandemic, and she wanted to get some supplies, she faced an error. Uh, as you all can guess, Caroline wasn't happy about it. So what's the first thing she did? The first thing she did was she kind of vented out to the support team for Amazing Groceries. But lo and behold, the support team had no idea what Caroline was facing uh, because they hadn't seen any bulletin come from the IT team or something like that. Now, once Caroline was done with that, she lodged her complaint, all those things. She wasn't done. She used social media platforms to plaster the error all over and sort of have bad reviews for the amazing grocery service. Now, this uh, impacted the organization's reputation, the customer base. People got worried. In pandemic times, they want groceries to be delivered on time, and they weren't able to rely on amazing groceries anymore. What's more, Caroline removed Amazing Grocery Store app from a mobile phone and put in a competitor's app, which would help with the same sort of service. So it took all of 5 to 10 minutes for Caroline to do this, and Amazing Groceries lost one customer. But that wasn't the story. That wasn't the full story. Typically, most organizations look at their revenue either on a quarterly basis or a half-yearly basis and do not have a real-time view into the revenue. Something similar was happening with Amazing Groceries as well. Uh, the revenue was dipping week after week, but nobody knew about it because they hadn't done a quarterly or a weekly review for it. So they were not aware that some of the problems that the customers are facing are actually leading to lower revenues week on week. On a very similar note, the customer satisfaction, the CSAT scores, were also trending in the same way on a week-on-week basis, but because nobody had real-time view into this, those weren't actually caught. So the trend wasn't actually caught. To add to that, the SRE team were getting more and more customer complaints. They were getting more and more IT tickets in the system without them knowing what exactly is going on. They were clueless. And that's when the SRE team decided to escalate the matter to the relevant stakeholders. They escalated the matter to the app owner, to the CFO, to the COO. However, those personas also got to know about the error through social media, and they weren't happy about the beating Amazing Groceries reputation was taking. So they had a emergency stakeholder meeting. In that meeting, they wanted to discuss what would it take for them to get a handle on the situation. So the SRE team put forward a demand that they wanted CI/CD pipeline visibility. The CFO said they wanted real-time revenue visibility. The app team wanted SLO and SLA visibility. The development team wanted quick identification of root cause so that they don't have to spend time in fixing issues or identifying issues and spend more time in fixing them quickly and getting the services up and running. And the COO wanted a real-time view into how the business health was. Now, they all came to a conclusion that the only way to solve this is to get a 360-degree view of their business. And the way to do that is through observability. They instrumented their platforms to give real-time view to the SRE team on the CI/CD pipeline. The developers got views into that as well, along with the app owners. So this kind of gave them all the metrics, all the code quality SLAs using observability platform. Not just that, they got visibility into the various services of the application, how they were interacting, how they were performing in real time as and when the customers were using them. From an app owner perspective, Olivia was able to look at the SLAs and SLOs with error budgets and compare the week on week performances in terms of what capacity they had, how many pods were failing, how many containers were waiting, those kind of things. And the COO got an overall health of what the customers were experiencing as a latency in terms of from different locations across the globe, in terms of what the real-time revenues were, overall health of the key services, uh, overall service abdex score, how they were performing, and the histograms of the uh, response times. From a CFO perspective, they were able to get real-time revenue insights into how many sales were happening, what were the losses, what were the causes of those losses, in terms of how many transactions failed. Now, if the transaction failed, what were the breakup of those failed transactions? For example, if there was a loss of revenue, how much of it was because of, let's say, payment service, and the CFO got to know that 50% of the times the payment services were failing, about 32% of the times the delivery services were failing, and causing a loss of revenue. So not they did not just get a view into what revenue was lost, but what was the cause of loss of revenue, and where should they deploy their resources in order to get a maximum return of the investment made. So they kind of identified that the payment services were the areas where they needed to concentrate because that's 50% of their lost revenue. Now, this sort of a scenario happens almost in every organization. And that's where you need the full stack observability. Now, when we talk about full stack observability, we mean starting from business metrics to user metrics to application performance to the platforms to the underlying virtual infrastructure or cloud infrastructure, that whatever you might be using. And if you have physical infrastructure, even that, right? So getting a full, you should have a platform in terms of getting metrics from all of these different layers across and getting the right views to the right persona. So whether it is the SRE persona, whether it's the developers, whether it is the app owners, the CXOs, all of them should be using the same platform. Now, once you do that, this helps, and this helped Amazing Groceries reduce their tickets because this made them more proactive. This made their platforms more stable because they were identifying problems much faster. Everybody was on the same platform, so that broke down the silos, and they were able to get to problems and resolve them much quicker than what they were able to do earlier. Similarly, on the CSAT front, because the problems weren't reaching the customers, they were able to see the trends moving up. And on the revenue side as well, the trends started going up once there were fewer errors and they were able to fix the payments issue, which was causing 50% of the problem. Now, this sort of a scenario occurs almost in every organization that is customer facing these days. So, what are the main challenges today that every organization faces? Number one is your application complexity. So, over time, applications have become way more complex, and especially with the service oriented architecture and the advent of Kubernetes coming in, the applications are way more dynamic, way more complex. On top of that, if you add the complexity of the platform on which they run, for example, Kubernetes platform, or combine the Kubernetes platform with virtual infrastructure, or if you combine the Kubernetes platform with virtual infrastructure on top of a public cloud or a multi-cloud environment, that kind of makes the complexity explode uh, in a big time. And it's very hard for organizations to get a handle around this. The way most organizations try to tackle this is by deploy or buying more and more tools. For example, they'll try and solve the application performance problem by buying an APM tool. They'll try and solve the network issues by buying a network monitoring tool. Now, that again creates another complexity, which is your tools complexity, which means now you have about 20, on an average, every organization has about 5 to 10 tools at the minimum, and they need to be all sort of put together. And if somebody has to make sense of the whole information end to end, but if it's available in different tools, in different formats, with different granularity, it's a very hard thing to do. Now let's try and visualize this problem as to what actually the organizer, they look like three simple problems, but when you try and visualize it, you're going to see how complex this situation gets. So let's say we have all the public clouds. So you're using multiple public clouds. On top of that, there are different silos for different distributed applications that you might be having, which might be worked on by various organizations which are spread across various geographic locations. Some of them are accessing remotely. Some of them are doing things from some other location. On top of that, your customers which get added onto the pile. So it, as you can see, it actually creates a big mess where it is very hard to get a handle. Now, in this whole confusion. If something goes wrong, it is very, very hard to pinpoint where exactly is the problem. And this era of multi-cloud, where almost all organizations are using some sort of public cloud services, multiple public cloud services, not just AWS or Azure or Google, but even beyond that, it becomes a real headache for people to identify where the problem is. First of all, get a handle of, get a view of where things are, and then get a handle of how you can do that. This is where observability comes into the picture. Now, the traditional way people tackle this is using monitoring with multiple tools, like I mentioned before. However, monitoring will not solve this problem for multiple reasons. First, uh, if we compare the pictures on the screen, on the left-hand side, you have the driver's view who's driving the racing car. Uh, the driver has information which is given to him real time, but he can only react to the information that he's seeing. So if he's able to see something wrong happening or something on the track, he's able to react to that. That limits the driver's view and the things he can control, because he's in a very reactive state. He's his primary objective is to go as fast as possible around the track with minimum problems, right? That's his objective. So whatever information he's getting, he's going to react to that in order to reach that objective. That is essentially what we used to do a few years ago with monitoring. We used to be very, very reactive in nature. But if you look at what's happening on the right hand side, where you have a 360-degree view of not just the driver that in your team, but you have a 360-degree view of what other teams are doing, what are the trends of lap times of other, or if there is an incident on the track that is happening, what's going on across, what's the weather like that is affecting the car. So the right hand side picture is more holistic, where you're looking at all the aspects of how it can impact your driver's race. That is what observability is. So we are moving from a left hand side kind of a reactive scenario to a right hand side kind of a scenario where our decisions are not just based on the telemetry we're getting in real time, and we're not just reacting to it, but we also have a view of things across all the factors. So observability is all about to see everything and to make decisions based on all the factors that are part of this particular environment. And that they could be business factors, they could be infrastructure based factors, they could be platform based factors, they could be application based factors, your user related factors, anything. The idea is to have an eye on everything in your stack before you make a decision or you try to identify a problem, because unless you're able to see everything, you won't be able to make the right decision. Now, how does one achieve observability? Now, you all organizations are almost at level one, where they, in some fashion or the other, they're doing infrastructure monitoring. They're doing some sort of APM or something like that, right? The way to do the way to move up in the maturity model and to achieve full stack observability, where you're able to make the decisions, you should be able to move on to the platform metrics. You should be able to get onto applications and then your users and then your business KPIs, right? So as you move on, these are the aspects you need to add to your observability. Now, uh, what are the different capabilities that you would need from the perspective of your maturity model? Starting off, metrics is the basic. Without that, you will not be able to identify what's going on. Then, when you move on to logs, those need to be as real time as possible. A lot of platforms start off with log analytics before they do log aggregation. So if you're starting off with log analytics and then moving on to log aggregation. Uh, that's moving up a level. After that, getting an APM like traceability to your application. So you can use traces uh, from whether you're using a proprietary platform or an open platform, that the choice is up to you. And on top of that, then you need to add events. And then finally, your organizational SLOs and SLAs. Unless you reach level 5 with SLOs, SLAs, you won't be able to complete, get to complete observability. Along the way, you will need multiple tools to do this as well. For example, at level 1, most organizations, if you look at a lot of the organizations, they start off with something like Prometheus, which will get their basic metrics done, and then move on to the logs using Fluentd. And then for tracing, a lot of them adopt either open tracing or open telemetry. And then at level 4, they would go for a visualization tool for events like Grafana or something very close to that. And then for business metrics, again, the capability to do your custom metrics and visualize them on a particular platform. So this is how a particular uh, organization needs to go through the journey from level 1 to level 5 in order to uh, reach observability and make their platforms robust. Now, what are the signs you need to look out for uh, where you need to identify that, okay, you need to move your monitoring from uh, the way you used to do earlier to an observability model? Number one, you need to keep an eye out for high mean time to recovery. If your organization is spending anything more than a day, more than 24 hours, to actually identify what's the root cause and restore services, you need to move faster. Because as you saw in the example I gave you, it takes a customer about 5 to 10 minutes to switch to your competitor. And if you're taking a day to resolve the issues and get the services back on, it's too much time and you're losing too many customers. Third, if your organization has a lot of silos, for example, to get to resolve a problem, uh, you have to deal with multiple teams, like you have to deal with the networking team separately, you have to deal with the application team separately, you have to deal with the database team separately, and kind of spend time in collating that information. That's when you should be considering observability, where you want to include the metrics, logs, traces at a minimum, and break them from their silos and get one view so that you're able to, again, identify problems way quicker and solve them. Also, if you're on any kind of dynamic platform like Kubernetes or multi-cloud, for example, if you're using services on AWS or GCP or a combination of that along with Kubernetes, that is definitely time to move on to observability, because none of the traditional monitoring tools will be able to help you uh, in terms of giving you the right information for your Kubernetes platforms. Also, if you're using multi-cloud, then your clouds will give you some sort of visibility into what their services are doing, but nothing that will go across the environment. So that's where observability comes into the picture, where you're able to look across the services, across your multiple environments, including your multi-cloud. Now, this time, I'd like to ask the audience if they have any questions. More than happy to answer that.
Hello, hi, this is Chen Ling. Just quickly introduce myself. It's my first time to attend any event in this group. Myself, I'm software engineering background and have been doing a lot recent years in data engineering and data analytics. Sorry, can you hear me?
Sorry, can you please repeat your question? Sorry.
Sorry, can you hear me
I can hear
clearly?
you now. I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I just quickly introduce myself, but throughout this process, I listening to this topic, it's interesting because for me, it looks like data analytics performance measurement capability. And I would imagine that the key critical element for this is someone need to be able to define the measures. What are the measures along all these different layers? Because if we want to say we want to have observation on application performance, then someone need to really know what application performance is, how it can be measured. And they will be expert in this area to define the business logic of each of these measures and knowing how it should be calculated, what are the input data, and where the data should be from. And I would imagine the major workload would be defining the data and defining the data pipeline, how the data can be collected, and how the data can be engineered to the way and being able to use for the calculation and get the correct measure. Is that correct as
Yeah,
how I understand?
absolutely. So I think you have twofold questions. Number one, how do we define, or how do we define the SLIs, SLOs, and SLAs? I think that's one of your questions. Number two, uh, where do we get that data from? Is that
Yes,
right? Those
source
are the two
data.
key
Yeah, I
questions.
think these are two major critical points to make this work. Okay, and or
Absolutely.
say, for example, if you talk about level 5, all those observations at all different levels, that means will be many experts in all these different areas to define what are the measures, how this can accurately measure the performance.
Absolutely. So I think I'll tackle the first one, which is the most important one. So once you have adopted the SRE style of monitoring, so if you look at how Google defined the DevOps space and how SREs should be working in order to get to make sure there is robust platforms available, that's where I think you should begin in terms of defining your SLIs, which would again come from each of those experts, like you said. So, for example, we're talking about an application performance, right? So, what is good performance of a particular application? That is clearly defined by the application owner themselves.
Yeah.
In case you're in operations, your job is not to define those SLIs at all, right? Now, having said that, what level of application performance are we looking at? Is that purely defined by the application owner? The answer is no. That actually comes from the business objective. So it flows from top down. So let's say, uh, if I take the example of Amazing Groceries, let's say their SLA is having less than 5 errors on checkout per month. Let's say that is their SLA, right? Now, once that is defined at a business level, that gets converted down into each of those layers. So, what does that mean for
Yeah.
your crashing of your mobile application? What does that mean for your Kubernetes that are running? What does that mean for your database queries? What should be the performance in order to avoid these scenarios?
Yeah.
What should be the SLOs for each one of them? So it starts from a business level objective,
Yeah.
and that is where the business KPI is the key. But then that filters down to each level, which will, at each level, you'll start defining the SLIs and SLOs, which will contribute to that particular SLA, which has been defined at the organization level. So if you think it's going to be bottom up, that's not how it will work.
Yeah,
Because
I
what we want to do
agree.
is
I agree.
a business objective which is supported by the technical stack that is underneath it.
Yes. So that also means we need to have someone understand the alignment between the business layer, between the application layer, and then technical layer. So all these different layers need to have very good alignment, so that the logic can be derived from when we set business KPI and then derived to application layer KPIs and then derive to technical layers.
Absolutely right. And how do you get that alignment? You won't get that alignment by having 10 tools, because one tool will
No.
not be each other, right? So
Mm.
what you need is a single view of your stack, starting with your business KPI. So someone has to,
Yes.
obviously, it's a
Understand the
twofold
logic.
problem.
Yeah.
It's a data problem, for sure. How do you
Mm.
get the data in, like I said? And the other
Mm.
problem is who defines the performance, right?
Yes. Yeah.
First, who defines the business performance, and
Mm.
then how does it trickle down to the other? So it's really a shift in the way an organization works. No
Yeah.
longer can
Mm.
different departments work with their own tools and be comfortable with it. No, that's not how it's going to work out. You have to break the silos. You have to collaborate on a single observability platform. No matter
Mm.
which one you choose, it doesn't matter. But you have to break those silos, and everybody gets the same objective. It's just that they define their SLAs and SLOs in their layer. Now, instead of
Mm.
a department, now you start thinking of them as a layer. In their layer, they will define their SLOs and SLAs, which will achieve that particular
Yes. Yeah.
business objective.
Mm. Does that mean that actually an organization needs someone has that kind of knowledge to be able to establish that kind of framework?
The knowledge already exists. The idea, and you're right, the framework is also defined. So if you look at how the modern organizations have defined DevOps and SRE practices, the frameworks have been defined for you already. All you need to do is start adopting those frameworks, start practicing those frameworks, and the knowledge exists inside the organization. There is no new knowledge coming in. It is just how you use that knowledge and how you structure it is what is different.
Yeah, from based on my experience, often what happens is, yes, there are many people have knowledge in different areas, but the thing is, often people are specialized in particular one areas. Then you need someone almost like architect who is able to understand from business enterprise level to application level to technical level to eventually have people on the same page.
Absolutely. I agree with you. There has to be a liaison between the business side and the technical side. Now, whether that's the enterprise architect, whether that is the CTO or the CDO, different
Mm.
organizations tackle that in different ways. But
Okay.
that is that has existed long before the concept of observability and SRE
Mm.
practices. So those roles already exist. It's just that they're not structured in
Mm.
a way that is across. So usually they're very siloed,
Yes.
and everybody reports up to either the CTO or the CIO, and that's where it stops, right?
Mm.
So CTO and CIO offices have to adopt this practice in order for it to propagate further down into the different organizations and bring them under the same framework. I agree with you. There has to be someone who has to do this translation from
Mm.
business or to the technical side. Now that could be various roles, and each organization takes it up differently. I've seen customers do it with an enterprise architect. I've
Yeah.
seen customers where the CTO directly gets involved. I've seen customers which who appoint a specific uh, like create a special role for SRE and
Mm.
observability practices. I mean, I've seen e-commerce companies create a whole observability department whose
Mm.
job is to bring about this change in the organization.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for your questions, Chen. We have additional questions in chat. One of the
Yep.
first question: what's the difference monitoring and observability? Is observability an overloaded term for more monitoring?
Uh, it's not an over. The main difference is the speed at which you ingest metrics, B, where do you ingest the metrics from, and C, how do you view the metrics and how do you make the decision? So that's the main difference. Is it something that is totally new? Absolutely not. Monitoring has evolved over the years into the next step of monitoring. So if you can call it monitoring 2.0, they've just given it a new word, which is called observability. because it is a more about moving fast, which have real-time suggestion, not just from your monitoring typically meant infrastructure, application, very, very limited scope. Observability has a scope which is almost unlimited. That's one of the main differences. It is not just related to your technical stack. It is not just related to, you can observe almost anything. Anything that's a time series data can be converted, whether it's revenue, whether it's your customer response time, whether it's number of tickets, anything is observable as long as it is time series data. So that is one of the major changes. Second is the speed at which you do that, uh, and the trending and the decisions that you take. So you don't take decisions based on what is happening right now. You do the analysis, and the analysis will be correct. You have correct and granular historical data, which means you need to know all your raw data needs to be saved. You cannot just average out data or roll up data and then make decisions based on that. Absolutely not. You need to have your raw data with you, for X amount of time, whatever your organization stipulates. You need to have the capability to ingest thousands and maybe millions of metrics per minute. Not just that, you need to have the capability to query them back. If you're able to ingest and your queries take hours, that's again losing you time. So you need to have the capability to not just ingest, but to query that data back very, very quickly in less than seconds. That's how you will be able to move fast, and that's how you'll be different from monitoring. Otherwise, you're pretty much doing the same thing, and like you said, in a more overloaded way, just trying to get more monitoring done for different aspects, but not really reaping the benefits. Because if you're not able to run those complex queries, answer questions like why is the payment service failing, or what is the impact of payment service on the revenue, like we saw here in this example, 50% of the time the revenues were because of payment services failing. If you can't make that correlation, you're not doing observability right.
Okay, so it's more about having more monitoring. It's not just about having more monitoring, but also about correlating all the various metrics that you're collecting. It's about monitoring in real
Absolutely.
time and a
So
lot
the
more.
unstructured and the versus defined, I think, is quite a good correlation. Defined is you know what you're looking for.
Exactly.
versus I don't know and
I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's how do you work with the unknowns,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. There is another question, which is you showed a slide deck about monitoring across multiple cloud environments. How do we correlate across all the services in a single cloud environment, leave alone multiple cloud environments? And what sort of customization needs to happen to correlate across all those within a single environment?
Again, so let's take example of a single cloud environment. Let's say you're running on a public cloud environment on which, let's say, you're running these clusters. On top of that, you're probably running your application, which is in, and then is interacting with multiple services. Now, first things first, every cloud provider will give you some sort of visibility into their services. That is given, right? So you will have integrations. Your observability platform should really have integrations from that cloud provider. That is a primary requirement. B, your observability platform should be able to give you instrumentation of the application that is running on it and the Kubernetes platform that you're running on. Now, you might choose their native Kubernetes platform, which again, with for a public cloud, those kind of metrics will be given to you. But if you choose your own Kubernetes platform on top of a public cloud, then you need to make sure that your observability platform is able to support that as well. From an application point of view, you should be able to get the traces and metrics. Now, this is where most public cloud platforms stop. So once you're running the services, they'll give you the metrics, but anything above that, they won't be able to. So that is why you need to choose a mechanism or a form which will give you additional information. So even on a public cloud service, what is your application performing? Those traces need to come through. Most public cloud give you that. And definitely on top of that, what is the user experience of the service that you're providing. That is almost no public cloud will give you. If they do, like Google Analytics and stuff like that, that is again a retrospective, that is not real time. You won't be able to troubleshoot with that. So you need a customized observability solution on top of any public cloud in order to do your full stack.
Rishi. Another question around maturity level. A linear progression, or can an organization?
You can get the maturity model choosing the right observability platform, but there is no one of the main, and why you need to start small is what I think the question that Chen asked, right? At every level, you have to define your SLIs, SLOs, and it's a slow process.
But isn't it also related to the people process and operationalizing,
That-
making sure that in the matric, you might have the tools, but part of your people process for any change level monitoring, all that kind of stuff, then you still really.
Yeah, so
what
the
I've noticed just in general with network performance. app
correct,
performance.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So the tool set is probably the easiest part to get
Yeah,
done.
It's about operationalizing that into your everyday lives in terms of not just troubleshooting, but forward thinking, capacity planning, intelligence spend, all
Absolutely.
that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So 100% you hit the nail on the head that the software or the observability platform is the simplest thing that you can solve. But will that get you that might give you a head start because it'll give you the basics of what you need to do. But to get it in the organization, to make it part of your daily routine, part of people and the process, that's what takes time. So yes, you can get a head start by choosing the right observability platform, but can you start at level 5 on day one using any mechanism? The answer is no, because you have to go through the grind. There has to be a mind shift. There has to be an organization shift for this to reap benefits. Now, is this a 1-year journey, a 5-year journey, a 1-month journey? Well, that depends on how fast an organization can change itself.
Thanks, Rishi. More questions. Are there tools available across all levels of maturity, and are there considerations with regards to vendors being the same?
So there are tools. If I get back to this particular slide, there are tools available for each level, right? Now there are, even CNCF defines a lot of these tools in their maturity model. So if you look at their radar uh, that's available in CNCF, they define a lot of these tools. They mention a lot of these vendors, but the whole idea behind this, and like I said, you'll get tools, vendors. There are multiple factors you need to take into account. For example, if you adopt Prometheus, you got to know Prometheus has a limitation beyond 1,000-2,000 containers. You won't be able to scale Prometheus, right? That's a limitation by design in Prometheus, right? If you're using Fluentd as your log ingestion or an aggregation mechanism, it works amazingly for Kubernetes based environment. You try the same with an Oracle log or something like that, it just falls flat, right? So there are various things that you need to, and every organization will have these unique challenges because of the unique tool sets they use. Remember, there is high level of complexity here. And where does the complexity come from? It comes from the fact that for solving the same problem, even if we take two e-commerce companies, they both aren't using the same stack, right? They are all using unique solutions in their environment to render the same services. So if you take eBay and you take Amazon, they might look like they're doing the same thing, but underneath the covers, they might be using totally different uh, tool sets in order to achieve that, right? And that's where the uniqueness and the of the problem comes in, and that's where there is no standard solution. You can, and like I've done here in terms of, I can categorize that what you need at a minimum, but again, there are at every level, even at level 1, level 2, level 3, there'll be tens of platforms available for you to choose from. What you choose, how you choose that actually depends on what you're trying to achieve. And again, it starts with what you're trying to achieve from a business level. That's where it trickles down.
Thanks, Rishi. There is another question around how does application architecture impact observability?
That's a good one. There are multiple factors affecting observability when it comes to application architecture. First of all, service definitely impact the complexity of what you're trying to achieve. Second, your use of third-party services, things like public cloud, things like services that are not under your control. For example, if Amazing Groceries here is using a third-party payment service, now you can see that 50% of their revenues lost is due to a third party. That adds to the complexity for the fact that they can't control the third. They don't know why that service is failing. From their side, everything might be running fine, but when it comes to your third party, things might not be as rosy, or you might not get the visibility because you're the service. So those kind of things definitely play a role. Your architecture. So let's say your application architecture is at let's say AWS, right? So it's utilizing all the services from AWS. As long as it's doing that, fine. But let's say you want to utilize a service coming from GCP or Azure along to go in order to go with that. What's the compatibility? So there are so many factors that go into this, and that's why we say that observability is important, because one platform will be able to give you the metrics for what you're doing on it, but not across. So unless you are able to see across, uh, you won't be able to get the true picture. And definitely your application architecture, if it's a simple application like a monolithic application, a Java-based application running in a virtual machine, the problem is not that big. The other problem comes in when you're running too old an application architecture. For example, you're running something like a monolithic C# or C++ application, then it gets harder to get visibility into the performance of that application, because if your programming language is so old that that's not supported by the modern observability tool set, which is available to you today, again, you're losing out on visibility. And the moment you lose out on visibility, you have a blind spot which can come back to bite you, right? So application architecture, application design, the choice of language, the choice of different platforms, everything plays a key role in how you will be observing them.
Thanks, Rishi. Another question is around sponsorship. Should the sponsorship for the tool set selected be grounds up, or should it be top down across the whole organization?
Oh, that's a great question and a very hard one to answer. Look, the ideal way to do it is it's a collective decision, right? As long as everybody is able to get the right view from that particular platform for the different tools, that's how you make a decision. But there might be certain requirements. For example, you might have a scenario where your application has two components, one running in, let's say, Spring, the other running in SAP, and now you need visibility into both. Now, there are not many tools out there that will give you visibility into both. So that might restrict your decision, right? So I typically think that there is a technical qualification that every team needs to do. As long as the platform you choose or zero in on is able to get those technical capabilities aligned and meet the management's requirements, that's the way. So I would say technical stakeholders across all the layers have to give a thumbs up to the platform that, or the tool set that is being chosen, and then finally the management. Because the most important thing is, if you're not able to get the management side, is the last level, right? So you're still able to use something else, like a business BI kind of a tool, where all this data is flowing, or the reverse way, you're still able to do those things. So I would say it's more important to get the technical side down first, because that's where your uh, major challenge lies, and then move on to, so it's, I would say it's top down ideally.
And
Oh, sorry, bottom up. So
makes sense.
yeah,
From my end, even a diversity of all these tools creates more complexity,
exactly,
rather than a single stack, which helps you collect much more insights and is much better indicators.
precisely.
Right. The last question is around how do you perform a cost benefit analysis of insights collected versus the cost of collecting those insights?
Ah,
I think that one I think comes down to the operationalize, because obviously everything costs money, right? To collect data, to store the data,
Process
and
it,
then process it.
generate insights
Yep.
out of
And
that.
that's, and if you, to that point, if you buy these tools and they just sit there and you use them reactively every now and again, that cost benefit is very difficult to justify. However, if they're part of an ongoing process, operationalization piece inside of the organization, that way you should be able to start to generate that kind of ROI a little bit better, or a little bit easier.
Yeah.
so typically the way we, and that's absolutely right, the way we handle this is, before you choose an observability platform, you do something called uh, as a business analysis in terms of what you're trying to achieve. For example, how big you put a dollar value to the problem that you're trying to solve. So let's say you're trying to solve a ticketing problem. Let's say you want to reduce the number of tickets from 500 tickets a month to 100 tickets a month. Now the question is, what are those 400 tickets a month which are extra costing you today? To do that kind of an analysis, again, you need someone who'll do it across the organization, across the different layers, because of the different people involved in it. So it is very important to get a handle, a dollar amount around the problem you're trying to solve with observability, or the multiple problems. Once you have that dollar amount, and it's, you might have to look to a third party in order to do that analysis. So once you do that, once you have that analysis with you, that okay, reducing my mean time to repair from X to Y, this is what the dollar amount is. Reducing my tickets from X to Y, this is the dollar amount to it. That will give you an idea of what you should be spending on your observability, uh, and that if that comes in much lower, clearly that's the.
And the same thing for sort of performance monitoring, right? If you're
Absolutely.
looking at a front of shop application where you've got revenue generation
Yep.
that's aligned with speed, that kind of ROI can also then filter back into it and so on.
That's the last of questions that we have. Anybody who's online, any other questions, please feel free to put it in chat. And for people who are joining online with us over here, there's free coffee and muffins. So please encourage more participation in person if you can. Would love to host you folks over here in Brisbane. Thanks a lot, Rishi.
Thanks, Rishi.
That was really enlightening. Learned a lot about observability and also have a lot more questions to continue discussions further.
Absolutely.
And thanks to everyone who joined online. Thanks, Heisi, Chen, Phil, and others. Great conversations. Please feel free to reach out if you would like to host any sessions. We'll again have the next session planned for 4 weeks from now, as usual. If there is any topics that interest you, please feel free to sort of put up a request for a topic on the meetup group so that we can plan around topics that the group is